ready for a really interesting deep dive.
You've sent over this Mind Check podcast transcript, and it's clear you're interested in getting a clearer picture of mental health.
Think of this as our guided tour, cutting through the noise and highlighting the most fascinating parts of this crucial topic.
What's fascinating about the Mind Check episode is that it tackles this idea of what mental health actually is.
It's something we often hear about but rarely stop to define.
It's true.
We throw around terms like anxiety and burnout so casually.
But if you ask someone to define mental health, it might feel like explaining the color blue.
You know it when you see it, but putting it into words, that's a bit trickier.
Exactly. And this is where definitions become so powerful.
Mind Check frames it beautifully. Mental health isn't just the absence of illness, it's the foundation for everything we do.
How we process emotions, handle stress, build relationships, even make decisions. It all stems from this core concept of mental well-being.
Okay, that makes so much sense.
It's like we wouldn't expect our bodies to run at peak performance without taking care of our physical health, right?
So why do we treat our minds any differently?
Precisely. And one of the biggest obstacles to that care is, unfortunately, the stigma surrounding mental health.
Mind Check dives into this, and what's striking is how this stigma thrives on silence.
It's like this unspoken pressure to present a perfect front, even if we're crumbling behind the scenes.
The hosts, May and John, actually share their own experiences with this, and hearing them be so open about their own struggles is actually what makes this episode so powerful.
Their vulnerability is what makes it relatable.
May talks about her experience with anxiety, and it's not just a clinical definition.
She describes that racing heart, the feeling of being overwhelmed by even simple tasks.
For anyone who's experienced that, it's instantly recognizable.
It's like she's giving language to those feelings we might not even have the words for ourselves.
And what really resonated with me was how she initially tried to just power through it.
Which is, unfortunately, a very common reaction.
We tend to think we should be able to handle everything on our own.
But May's story highlights a vital point. Acknowledging that you need support is not weakness. It's actually a huge step towards strength.
Talking to a friend was her turning point, and it eventually led her to therapy.
Which, again, is another area where stigma rears its ugly head.
There's still this misconception that therapy is only for serious problems.
And that couldn't be further from the truth.
Think of it like this. If you had a persistent pain in your arm, you'd see a doctor.
Right. You wouldn't just ignore it and hope it goes away.
Mental health is no different.
It's healthcare.
And it's encouraging to hear how therapy gave May the tools to understand her anxiety and develop coping mechanisms.
But what I found really interesting is that John, her co-host, had a very different experience with burnout.
John's experience with burnout was a little different.
Yeah, it was.
He was juggling so much, striving for that ideal of having it all.
Right.
And it finally caught up with him.
It's a common trap, isn't it?
It is.
We try to be superhuman, but it takes a toll on our well-being. John found that burnout wasn't just about feeling tired. It was this overwhelming sense of being overloaded, unable to cope with even the smallest tasks.
I feel that.
Yeah.
There's a difference between feeling tired and feeling like you're broken.
Huge difference.
And John's story really emphasizes how much those individual experiences matter. What worked for May exercise and therapy might not be the solution for everyone.
Precisely.
Right.
Mental health is such a personal journey, and Mind Check does a great job of highlighting that. It's not about finding the one answer. It's about finding your answer. John found relief in setting boundaries, practicing mindfulness, and journaling.
Which brings us to those practical tips we've all been waiting for, right?
Right.
Mind Check actually goes into a lot of these strategies, and it's not about complicated techniques or expensive retreats. It's about small, achievable changes we can incorporate into our daily lives.
Exactly. The Mind Check hosts recommend practices that are accessible to everyone. Like, May is a big believer in the power of exercise. Not necessarily for weight loss.
Yeah.
But for its ability to boost mood and reduce stress. Even a brisk walk can make a huge difference.
And there's something about moving your body that just shifts your perspective.
Absolutely.
It's like you're actively choosing to take care of yourself, even if it's for just 30 minutes.
It's about making that time for you.
Yeah.
And that ties in perfectly with mindfulness, which May emphasizes as well. Just a few minutes of intentional breathing, focusing on the present moment, can really help ground you and calm racing thoughts.
That's a great point. And John is a big proponent of journaling as a way to process those thoughts and feelings that might otherwise get stuck in our heads. It can be a really cathartic way to release stress and make sense of what's going on.
It's like giving your mind a break, right? You're actually taking those thoughts and emotions, writing them down, and getting them out of your system.
Yeah.
And of course, we can't forget about sleep.
Oh, right.
May and John both acknowledge how essential it is for our mental well-being and how easily we sacrifice it in the name of productivity.
Oh, I'm so guilty of that. Stay up late scrolling through social media, telling myself I'm relaxing. But as they point out, that lack of sleep just makes everything worse. We're tired, irritable, and our brains simply don't function at their best.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They encourage listeners to prioritize a regular sleep schedule, even on weekends, to keep our natural sleep-wake cycle regulated.
Yeah.
It's about treating sleep as the essential part of self-care that it is.
Solid advice. And all of these strategies, from exercise to mindfulness to sleep, work even better when we have a strong support system.
Oh, for sure.
It's so easy to isolate yourself when you're struggling.
It is.
But May and John emphasize the importance of reaching out to others.
There's a powerful quote in the episode that really sticks with me. Sometimes all you need is someone to listen without judgment.
Oh, wow.
It's about being present for others, allowing them to share their experiences without trying to fix them or offer unsolicited advice.
And that's something we all need to remember, right?
Yeah.
It's okay not to have all the answers. It's okay to just be a safe space for someone to process their thoughts and feelings.
It's about creating a culture of understanding and acceptance around mental health. And that brings us to a very important point about supporting loved ones who might be struggling.
And sometimes that support means knowing when maybe we're out of our depth.
Yeah.
When someone needs more than we can give. Mind Check dives into this. How do you offer support,
Right.
but also encourage getting professional help
It's tricky.
when it's needed without making it,
It's that balance
weird?
of
Yeah.
saying, hey, I'm here for you, but also recognizing, you know what, this might be beyond my expertise.
It's like, I'm not a mechanic if your car breaks down. I can be sympathetic,
Exactly.
but I'm not the one to fix it.
And sometimes suggesting that professional help is actually the most helpful thing you can do.
It goes back to that stigma thing.
Absolutely.
You're not saying you're broken, go get fixed. It's more like,
You deserve support.
yes. And there are people who, this is their thing.
Exactly.
They've studied this. They have tools.
They have the expertise that we might not. And it's okay to acknowledge that.
It's like any other healthcare.
Exactly.
You wouldn't tell someone, just get over a broken leg.
Right. You wouldn't tell them to just walk it off.
Exactly. So why is mental health?
Treat it any differently.
Yeah.
Okay.
And speaking of things that affect it, we can't ignore the elephant in the room, right?
The tech.
The technology.
Oh, yeah. Huge one.
That Mind Check spends a bunch of time on. And it really gets you thinking because it's such a...
Double-edged sword.
It is.
Yeah.
Because on one hand, so much info is out there.
Support groups, even therapy apps, all at your fingertips.
But then there's
That's
that pressure,
be on
Yeah.
to be connected constantly.
the comparison game,
Oh, social media, the highlight reels,
where it feels like everyone else has it figured out.
and you're the only one struggling.
Yeah.
But remember, those are just curated glimpses.
Yeah, it's not the whole story.
Exactly. MindCheck makes this point. Don't compare your behind the scenes to someone else's finished movie.
Oh, that's good.
Because that's what it is, right? We're seeing the end result, not all the takes that went wrong.
And that comparison game, it really messes with you.
It could be so damaging.
Instead of being grateful for what you have, you're looking at what you don't,
Exactly. And that's where that mindful tech use comes in.
taking back control.
Yes. Are you scrolling mindlessly, or are you choosing to engage with stuff that makes you feel good?
Because we have that power now, right?
Yeah.
To mute, to unfollow, to curate what we see.
It's about shaping your digital world instead of letting it shape you.
So, big picture, we've talked about what mental health is, not just the absence of problems.
Right. It's a whole foundation.
The stigma, which is huge.
Mm.
Then those personal stories, finding what works for you.
Because there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Impacts role, the good and the bad. It's a lot.
It is. But this Mind Check episode and our deep dive, it reminds us it's a journey,
Not a destination, yeah.
ongoing, always learning, adjusting as we go. And that's okay.
It is. So, as we wrap up, a little something to think about, building on what MindCheck said.
Okay.
If tech can be isolating despite connecting us more than ever, how do we use it for good?
Ooh, I like that.
To build meaningful connections and actually help our mental health in this digital age?
It's a challenge for sure.
But maybe a challenge worth accepting, right?
Social media and its impact on mental health. You sent over some really thought-provoking research, and I'm ready to unpack it all.
Yeah, what's so fascinating about this topic is we're essentially studying a phenomenon in its adolescence. Social media hasn't been a dominant force for that long, yet its effects, as you've highlighted in your sources, are already so deeply intertwined with our well-being.
It really does feel like a wild west of like filters and feeds out there. And you know me, I love a good scroll through my feed as much as anyone. But lately I've been wondering, at what cost? One of the articles you shared called it the curated reality trap.
Absolutely. This idea that what we see on social media is often a carefully curated highlight reel, not a reflection of real life. I think that's crucial to remember.
Because let's face it, no one's posting about their anxiety attack in traffic. Or like their existential crisis at 3:00 a.m. It's all beach vacations and engagement rings.
Precisely. And this curated reality, I think, becomes even more potent when we consider, you know, the inherent human tendency for social comparison. We're wired to size each other up, but social media amplifies this to the nth degree.
It's like social comparison on steroids. I know I've definitely fallen into the trap of comparing like my behind the scenes to someone else's highlight reel.
And that's where the real danger lies. It's not just about, feeling a pang of envy here and there, constant upward social comparison. So that is, comparing ourselves to those we perceive as better off has been directly linked to increased anxiety, depression, and lower self-esteem.
So it's not just a harmless pastime. There's actual science backing up the negative impact. That's kind of terrifying, to be honest. One of the studies he sent over mentioned that even just passively scrolling through Instagram for an hour can lead to significant decreases in self-reported body image satisfaction.
And this is particularly true, I think, for platforms that prioritize appearance. The more we're bombarded with images of seemingly perfect bodies, lifestyles, relationships, the more likely we are to feel inadequate in comparison.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But before we spiral into like a digital despair here, I'm curious, were there any positive aspects of social media highlighted in the research? I mean, can't be all bad, right?
You're absolutely right to point that out. Social media, like most things in life, isn't inherently good or bad. It's a tool, and its impact hinges on how we use it. Your sources did mention the positive power of online communities, particularly for mental health advocacy and support.
Yes. I've seen firsthand how powerful those online spaces can be. People sharing their stories, offering support, and really working to reduce the stigma surrounding mental health.
Exactly. It's like finding a digital support group without the geographical limitations.
And let's be real, sometimes it's just easier to share vulnerable things online than it is face-to-face.
Absolutely. Anonymity can be such a powerful tool for fostering open and honest conversations. But it's not just about, finding existing communities. It's also about curating your own online experience.
Oh, that's a good point. We have the power to choose who we follow and what we allow into our feeds.
Precisely so. Instead of just mindlessly scrolling, be intentional about it. Seek out accounts that inspire you, educate you, make you feel good, and unfollow those that you know trigger feelings of inadequacy or comparison.
I love that. It's like Marie Kondoing your social media. If it doesn't spark joy, get rid of it.
Yeah.
But even when we're being mindful about our feeds, there's still the issue of like the sheer amount of time we're spending online. I read in one of these articles that the average person spends over 2 hours a day on social media.
It's a significant chunk of time, and often we're not even fully present during that time, right? We're just scrolling mindlessly on autopilot.
Totally. It's like this weird in-between space where we're not really relaxing, but we're not really engaging either.
And that's where I think this concept of a digital detox comes in. It's about intentionally disconnecting from our devices, from the digital world, and using that time to reconnect with ourselves and with the physical world.
So it's not about like swearing off social media forever. It's more about just like hitting the reset button.
Exactly. I've experimented with this myself, taking weekends off social media. And I've found it incredibly beneficial for my mental clarity and just my overall well-being.
It's like a mini vacation for your mind.
Yeah.
What other strategies, besides like a full-on detox, can help us kind of build a healthier relationship with social media?
One of the most effective strategies I found is setting boundaries. And this can look different for everyone. Some people find it helpful to set specific times for checking social media, treating it like an appointment rather than a constant distraction.
I like that. So instead of checking your phone every time there's a lull, you're consciously choosing when to engage.
Exactly. Others find it helpful to establish tech-free zones in their homes, like the bedroom or the dinner table.
Oh, the dinner table rule. My family tried that, and it actually led to some surprisingly engaging conversations.
You see, it's about reclaiming those moments of genuine connection, both with others and with ourselves.
This is all making me think about how interconnected our mental and physical health truly are. One of the articles you shared talked about how stress can manifest physically, in the form of headaches, digestive issues, even insomnia.
Absolutely. Our minds and bodies are not separate entities. They're so deeply intertwined. And just as chronic stress can impact our physical health, neglecting our physical well-being can negatively affect our mental state.
So it's a two-way street.
Precisely. And this interconnectedness, I think, really highlights the importance of holistic self-care.
What does that look like in practice?
It's about, finding small, sustainable ways to nurture both your mental and physical health. Things like incorporating movement into your day, even if it's just a 20-minute walk.
I'm all about a good walk and talk.
Prioritizing sleep, nourishing your body with nutritious foods.
It sounds so simple, but sometimes the simplest things are the easiest to overlook.
They really are. And remember, self-care isn't selfish. It's an essential part of showing up as the best version of yourself.
I love that. It's not an indulgence, it's an investment.
Precisely. And one that pays dividends in all areas of your life.
You know, it's interesting how this conversation has kind of shifted from the potential pitfalls of social media to the importance of self-care. It's like the key takeaway here isn't to demonize social media, but to empower ourselves to use it in a way that supports our overall well-being.
Absolutely, knowledge is power. And by understanding the potential downsides of excessive social media use, we can make more conscious choices about how we engage with these platforms.
And how we engage with ourselves and our own well-being in the process. This has been incredibly insightful, but we've got to take a quick break. We'll be back in a jiffy to continue this deep dive and explore some specific resources that can help us navigate this complex landscape. And we're back ready to dive into the final part of our exploration of social media and mental health. We've talked about the challenges, the importance of mindful engagement, and the power of self-care. But now let's get practical. You've provided some excellent resources in your research for those who might be feeling overwhelmed or in need of additional support.
Absolutely. It's one thing to be aware of the issues, but knowing where to turn for help is crucial. And the good news is there are more options available than ever before.
That is reassuring to hear. I know for some, even admitting they need help can be a hurdle. Where's a good place to start?
Well, therapy is an excellent resource, and it's become much more accessible in recent years. We're no longer limited to searching for therapists in our immediate vicinity.
Right. I've heard a lot about telehealth platforms, especially since the pandemic. It feels like that's really opened doors for people.
It has been revolutionary. Platforms like BetterHelp and Talkspace connect you with licensed therapists online, offering a level of convenience and flexibility that traditional therapy often lacked.
So you can literally be on your couch, in your pajamas, talking to a licensed professional. That does remove some of the barriers people might face.
Exactly. Plus, many of these platforms offer different communication methods, video calls, phone calls, even texting, catering to various comfort levels and preferences.
That's fantastic. But what about those times when someone needs immediate support, like in a crisis situation?
That's when hotlines become invaluable. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 988 in the U.S., and Samaritans in the U.K. are available 24/7, providing free and confidential support. And it's important to remember, you don't have to be suicidal to reach out. These hotlines are there for anyone experiencing overwhelming emotions, anxiety, panic attacks, anything at all.
Having that lifeline available at your fingertips can make all the difference. Knowing someone is there to listen without judgment can be incredibly powerful.
It truly can. And beyond therapy and hotlines, there's a growing movement, I think, embracing the power of community. Support groups both in person and online provide a safe space for people to connect with others who understand their experiences.
There's something so validating about knowing you're not alone in what you're going through.
Absolutely. Sharing experiences, offering encouragement, and simply listening to one another can be incredibly therapeutic.
I love that you mentioned online support groups. It goes back to what we were discussing earlier about social media's potential for good. These platforms can connect us with like-minded individuals, forming communities we might not have otherwise found.
Precisely. And let's not forget about mental health apps. There are apps designed to help track moods, manage anxiety, practice mindfulness, even connect with peer support groups. Technology can be a powerful tool for self-care and support.
It's like having a pocket-sized toolkit for mental well-being.
Exactly. And the best part is these resources are constantly evolving and expanding. There's no one-size-fits-all solution, so it's about finding what works best for you.
This has been such an insightful deep dive. As we wrap things up, is there one final takeaway you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Remember, you are not alone. It takes courage to acknowledge when you need support. And there's no shame in seeking help. Prioritizing your mental health is a sign of strength, not weakness. Looking at how cultures around the world, they don't all see mental health the same way, do they? And that affects everything. Relationships, especially. Oh boy. And for parents, whole other level. So get ready, because this is going to be fascinating.
You know, what struck me about the sources for this deep dive? It's how much they focus on the human side of it all. Not just the clinical stuff, but how our past, our culture, even who we love, it all ties into our mental well-being.
It's true. Like when you were saying that, I was thinking it's like someone took a kaleidoscope and instead of colors, it's different cultures, each one with its own view of what mental health is.
Exactly.
Like John said, right from what you sent over, cultural background, it's huge. How we see mental health, talk about it, even if we get help, it all comes from that, almost like our culture hands us this.
And that rule book, right? It can be tough to even realize it's there, but it affects people. Say you grow up told mental struggles are weakness, gotta hide it, asking for help. That feels impossible.
Like you're supposed to just muscle through it, even when what you need is someone to be strong for you, for a change.
And that pressure to look fine, never let them see you sweat, literally or emotionally. So damaging, because then people just suffer quietly instead of getting help.
Maybe brought that up too, how in some Asian cultures there's this stigma, almost like it's shameful to have mental health struggles.
Right, and I'm thinking of
Yeah.
like how in some cultures the group is more important than the individual. Admitting to a mental health struggle, it could be seen as letting the whole family down.
Adding to that rule book we talked about, making it even harder to break free. It really highlights you can't treat mental health the same everywhere. Got to be sensitive to each culture.
Absolutely. One size fits all doesn't apply here. No way.
And John made this point. It's not even just like whole cultures. Even within Western cultures, there's differences. Some families are super open about mental health. Others, it's taboo, never discussed.
It's amazing how that happens, right? Like these mini cultures, even inside families, shape how we see things from such a young age.
So it's not some us versus them thing. It's in all of us, no matter our background. Touches everyone somehow.
And that's so important to remember, especially when we start thinking about how these cultural influences play out in our closest relationships.
Absolutely. Our relationships, particularly romantic ones, are deeply intertwined with our mental well-being. May used a phrase that really stuck with me. She called it a two-way street.
What's fascinating about that idea is it acknowledges that mental health challenges can definitely create tension in a relationship. But a healthy relationship can actually be a source of strength and support when navigating those challenges.
It's a delicate dance, isn't it? Finding that balance between supporting your partner and setting healthy boundaries for your own well-being.
It is a delicate dance. And John had a really insightful personal anecdote in the material you shared. He talked about how opening up to his partner about his own mental health actually strengthened their bond.
I loved that part. It wasn't easy for him to do, but taking that risk allowed them to understand and support each other on a much deeper level. It made me wonder if that vulnerability is part of what helps build truly resilient relationships.
It's definitely possible. When we're able to show up authentically with our partners, even the messy parts, it creates a foundation of trust and intimacy that can help us weather those inevitable storms.
Made an interesting point about that, too. She emphasized the importance of setting boundaries, especially when one partner is going through a tough time. She stressed that it's not selfish to prioritize self-care, even within a relationship.
It's almost like that oxygen mask analogy they tell you about on airplanes. You have to put on your own oxygen mask first before you can help those around you.
Because you can't pour from an empty cup. It's so true. Okay, so we've talked about how cultural background influences our views on mental health and how those views can affect our romantic relationships. But let's dive into another layer of complexity here: parenting. John and May both had a lot to say about the mental load that comes with raising kids.
And it's a heavy load to carry. Parenting is arguably one of the most demanding jobs out there, both physically and emotionally. Our sources both talked about the exhaustion, the feeling of being overwhelmed by responsibility, and the constant struggle to prioritize your own well-being when you're caring for little humans.
It's that constant on switch, right? You're always needed, always responsible for someone else's well-being. It's easy to see how that could take a toll over time.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so vital for parents to have a strong support system in place, whether it's a partner, family, friends, or even a therapist. They need a space to process their emotions, recharge, and take care of their own mental health.
But it's easy to feel guilty about that, right? Like, as parents, we should be able to handle it all on our own.
I think the guilt is a big part of the reason why so many parents struggle in silence. It's where societal expectations come into play, and why it's so important to challenge the idea that parents, especially mothers, need to be superhuman. We need to normalize self-care for parents and create more robust systems of support. Parents need to be able to prioritize their own well-being without feeling guilty or like they're failing.
It's like we're told asking for help, that's weak, but isn't it stronger to know your limits?
Right. To admit you need support when everyone's saying, be independent, that takes guts. And not just for parents, for everyone.
It's interesting thinking back over everything we've talked about, different cultures, how they see mental health, the impact on relationships, and then, wow, the pressure on parents.
Yeah, we really dug into how our background shapes not just our opinions on mental health, but if we even try to get help, and how our relationships, they're like that mirrors, but also where we find support.
Right. It's like this need for honesty, for really getting each other and being there for support. It runs through all of it. Like those are the building blocks for a world that's mentally healthier, you
Yeah.
know?
Making space, whether it's inside ourselves or with people we love or our communities, where mental health isn't something to hide, but you can actually talk about it.
So then, okay, we know all this now. What do we do with it? John and May, they didn't really have like a to-do list at the end, did they?
Yeah, it's always the question, isn't it? Knowledge is great, but then action, I think. It's those little things day to day. Friends struggling, check in on them. Be more open with your partner, even when it's tough. And those old ideas that make mental health shameful. Got to challenge those every chance we get.
And reminding ourselves and each other, it's okay to ask for help. Doesn't mean you failed. It means you're fighting for yourself or for someone you love.
Well said. Asking for help, that's courage.
Yeah.
Shows you're not giving up. And hey, you being open like that might be what someone else needed to hear to do the same for themselves. And the surprising compass for this journey, new parents.
Oh, it's funny how the most demanding experiences can really offer the most profound insights.
Yeah.
And I think what's fascinating about all the research that you've gathered here is it uses the challenges that new parents face to highlight some of those mental health needs
Okay.
that we all share.
So lay it on me. How do sleep-deprived nights and
Yeah.
diaper explosions
Yeah.
translate into advice that can help me,
Right.
someone who can barely keep their houseplants alive,
Yeah.
manage stress, and prioritize my own well-being?
Well, one source that you shared described the experience of a new parent as a crash course in resilience.
Okay.
And I think that's incredibly insightful
Yeah.
because it's about navigating those constant demands, often with very little sleep and, a whole lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, I can only imagine just picturing it makes me feel a little stressed.
Right. But here's where it gets interesting.
Huh.
All of these sources really argue that the skills that parents develop,
Yeah.
things like, and these are skills that we can all use, like setting boundaries, asking for help, and I think most importantly, finding those moments of joy in the chaos, are incredibly relevant to anyone facing demanding situations, whether it's a high-pressure job
Right?
or navigating a breakup or whatever it is.
Totally. So it's almost like those parenting challenges are a pressure cooker for developing these coping mechanisms
It is.
that we can all benefit from.
It is. That's a great way to put it, yeah. One study that I saw cited in the material found that 70% of new parents felt like they were failing
What?
at some point during that first year.
70%. That's a lot.
Yeah.
But I can see how that feeling, that pressure to be perfect,
Mm-hmm.
isn't unique to parenting at all. It's like it's everywhere.
Precisely. And the research really highlights how that pressure, whether it stems from those societal expectations
Right.
or those workplace demands or even just our own internal critic,
Yeah.
can lead to stress, anxiety, and even burnout.
Okay. Yeah. That's definitely resonating with me. I've definitely felt that. And it sounds like these sources are saying that by understanding how new parents navigate all those pressures, we can actually learn to manage our own mental well-being a bit better.
You got it. It's about recognizing the universality of these challenges and really
Right.
drawing on the wisdom and the resilience that parents develop in those early intense years.
So what's the first step? How do we even begin to translate
Yeah, that's the
those parenting lessons
right.
into actionable steps for the rest of us?
So one of the most powerful takeaways from the research is this idea of regular check-ins.
Okay.
It's something that many new parents naturally gravitate towards as a way to manage the emotional roller coaster of those early days.
Okay, so walk me through this.
Yeah.
What exactly are regular check-ins? It sounds kind of like meditation, but maybe a bit more grounded in the day-to-day.
That's a great way to put it. It's about taking a few moments several times throughout your day to pause
Okay.
and really tune in to your emotional and physical state.
Mm-hmm.
The sources even suggest setting reminders on your phone at first.
Oh, okay. So we're not doing this cold turkey.
Yeah, exactly. Until it becomes more of a habit.
So instead of waiting for a meltdown, you're checking in like, how's everyone doing in here?
Exactly.
Right.
And you'd be surprised what you notice.
Yeah.
Maybe you've been staring at your computer for hours and your shoulders are tense, or perhaps you read a stressful email and now you feel that familiar knot in your stomach.
Uh-huh.
So, it's all about noticing those subtle shifts.
I'm guessing that simply noticing these things is the first step to actually managing them.
You're catching on. One parenting blog you shared put it brilliantly. They called it building your emotional literacy. Just like kids need to learn to identify their emotions.
Yeah.
We often need to relearn that skill as adults, especially in a world full of distractions.
It's like we're so used to pushing down those feelings, those early warning signs, that we forget to actually listen to what our minds and bodies are trying to tell us.
Right. And that's where those regular check-ins come in. They're like those little course-correct moments
You got it.
that can prevent those feelings from snowballing into something bigger.
Right.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this connects back to that pressure to be perfect we talked about earlier. If we're always focused on just powering through, we miss those opportunities to check in and course correct,
Yeah.
which can eventually lead to burnout or even bigger mental health challenges down the road.
That's a really astute observation.
Yeah.
And it's something that the research emphasizes. Ignoring those early signs of stress or overwhelm doesn't make them disappear.
It often just makes them louder and harder to ignore later on.
It reminds me of something I read in one of those articles.
Yeah.
That new parents often talk about feeling like they're failing, when in reality they're just facing incredibly high expectations. Is that connected to this idea of regular check-ins?
Absolutely.
Right?
Those check-ins are a way to acknowledge those expectations, that pressure to do it all perfectly.
Okay.
And to say, you know what? It's okay to not be okay.
That's a great way to put it.
It's about giving yourself permission to feel those difficult emotions without judgment.
That's such an important point, and it actually segues perfectly into the next big theme from the research, which is setting boundaries. Because if we're not careful, those external expectations, those pressures we were just talking about, can completely overwhelm our own needs and priorities.
One of the most powerful things I read in your stack of sources was a quote from a therapist specializing in postpartum anxiety.
Okay.
She said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that boundaries are the difference between surviving and thriving, especially for new parents.
Okay, so how do we take that powerful idea, that need for boundaries, and actually apply it in a way that feels doable?
Right. That's a great question.
Because I'll be honest, setting boundaries always felt a bit intimidating. Like, where do I even start?
You're not alone.
Right.
And that's why I appreciate how these sources break it down into manageable steps.
Yeah.
One of them even called it boundary setting for beginners, which I kind of love.
Okay, I need to hear this. What does boundary setting for beginners even look like?
Yeah.
So boundaries for beginners, it sounds almost deceptively simple.
Right.
What's the secret sauce?
Well, this source I mentioned framed it as a series of questions you can ask yourself before committing to something.
Okay.
Questions like, will this task or activity drain my energy or boost it?
Okay, so it's about being more mindful of where we're directing our energy in the first place.
You got it.
I like that.
And another question they suggested was, am I saying yes out of obligation or genuine desire?
Oh, raising my hand on that one.
Because often, especially for those of us who struggle with people-pleasing,
Right.
we can end up feeling completely depleted because we're constantly saying yes to things that don't actually align with our values or priorities.
Which takes us right back to that pressure to be perfect, doesn't it?
Right.
It's like we're trying to be everything to everyone else, but in the process, we lose sight of our own needs.
You nailed it.
Okay, so those boundaries are like the ultimate expression of self-care.
They are, yeah. And that's why those regular check-ins are so crucial. They help us to reconnect with ourselves, to tune into what we really need so we can set boundaries from a place of self-awareness rather than just reacting to the demands of others.
So we've got those regular check-ins as our foundation, and now we're building in those healthy boundaries. What's next in this parenting-inspired guide to better mental well-being?
The final piece of the puzzle and it's one that often gets overlooked, is celebrating our wins no matter how small.
Okay, I can get behind that. We could all use a little more celebration in our lives.
Yeah.
But what does that look like in practice, especially when it comes to something as ongoing as mental health?
One of the sources talked about creating a joy journal,
Okay.
a dedicated space to jot down moments of gratitude, small victories, or things that simply brought a smile to your face throughout the day.
It's like we're so programmed to focus on what's wrong that we forget to acknowledge what's going right. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
And what's fascinating is that this idea of celebrating small wins is something that many parents do instinctively with their kids.
Yeah.
They cheer for those first steps, those messy finger paintings, those tiny triumphs that we might take for granted as adults.
So we're essentially borrowing from the parenting playbook
Hmm,
to reparent ourselves a bit.
you got it.
I love that.
It's about bringing that same level of compassion,
Mm.
that same willingness to celebrate the small wins to our own journey of mental well-being.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Who knew that we could learn so much about managing our own mental health by looking at the experiences of new parents?
It's proof that sometimes the most profound lessons come from the most unexpected places.
And on that note, as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with this final thought.
Okay.
What's one small step you can take today to prioritize your mental well-being?
Yeah, I love that question.
Whether it's setting aside 5 minutes for a check-in, saying no to that extra obligation, or simply acknowledging a win, no act of self-care is too small.
It's a great place to leave it.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive,
Thanks for having me.
and we'll catch you next time.